Good morning, my virtual peeps. Let's pray real quick, and we'll look through today's lesson agenda. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for this day, for this opportunity for us to continue sharpening our English skills, even as we're at home. We do pray, God, that you are blessing our voices today as we get some monologues in, and as we prep for our African American Literature Unit 2. We love you, Jesus. We ask that you're blessing our day, keeping us warm on this very cold day. We pray this all in your name. Amen. So the beginning of your video is a little bit different than the one that I have for my in-person classes, just because we're doing monologues instead of skits. So first objective today is to present monologues with clear voices and characters. The other thing that we're working on today is working on some nonfiction reading as we study some African American literature today too. First thing I want to note here regarding monologues is that the due date for your monologue project has been shifted to Thursday. I wasn't as available over the weekend as I wanted to be, so I do apologize if there are any of you looking for me on Teams and didn't quite find me there. I had kind of an unpredictable weekend. As a reminder, you may record your monologue if you want to do yours in video format and submit it to the assignment, or you can perform your monologue on Microsoft Teams with me or in one of our Teams meetings today or Thursday whenever you are ready. The other thing that we're working on here in the video you're watching is our reading of Frederick Douglass's Our Paper and Its Prospects. I've already recorded that one for my in-person class, so there might be a little jump in this video, but that's totally fine. Notice I've given a longer deadline for this because I know you're working on a couple of things for me, your monologues and your vocab for our African American Lit unit as well. We'll look at Our Paper and Its Prospects in a moment. So on Thursday, our next lesson, there will be some more time to finish monologues, get those submitted, or do them inside of our Teams meetings. We'll also take some time to read and discuss some more Black American nonfiction with Booker T. Washington. So pretty identical lessons between today's and Thursdays, just different texts to read. One thing that I need to move into this lesson folder is the monologue assignment. I'll do that in just a moment here. But notice that we've got an assignment to do with Frederick Douglass reading and the reading questions. Once again, I've already recorded that, so there will be a little jump in this video, and that's totally fine. I'm also going to open up our Frederick Douglass reading questions right now in a new tab, because that's the text I'll be reading from here. Just open this up real quick. You can open up your document now. Just feel free to pause the video and get that open, because we'll be looking at that in a moment. Before we dive into Frederick Douglass's newspaper, the North Star, or at least one article from it, I do want to give you some background about who he was as a historical figure. Once again, if you haven't opened up the document, the assignment yet, you'll want to open that up in another tab, because that's what I'll be reading from and doing some of the analyzing, doing some of the breaking down for you in this video. And I'm going to start by giving some background information on Frederick Douglass. All right, so Frederick Douglass, perhaps you've seen this photo in a history book before. Just the famous stern look, white beard, white hair. Famous Black historical figure. Pretty much the head of the Abolition movement in the mid to late 1800s. I want to give you some background about Frederick Douglass's life here a little bit before we look into his newspaper article that we'll be studying in class today. So first of all, who was Frederick Douglass? This is just some background about him. Looking at his younger life, he did escape from slavery. Specifically, he kind of purchased his way out of slavery. He found ways to make some money on the side in semi-legal ways, and he was able to buy his freedom. He did go on to become one of the leading African American figures of his time. He is famous for being a prominent leader in the campaigns against slavery called the Abolition movement, and later, after that, for giving blacks the right to vote. He would see some small victories in gaining the right to vote in his lifetime, but obviously after his lifetime, there were many more victories to be won. What we'll be looking at is an article from his newspaper called the North Star. It was an anti-slavery newspaper that he started. He also wrote his autobiography. He wrote two, actually. He held several posts in the government. They were the highest held government post by an African American in the 1800s, also known as the 19th century. A couple of interesting facts about him. So looking at his childhood, Frederick Douglass was born into slavery. When he was a baby, he was separated from his mother, like so many African slaves were. Frederick Douglass was born as Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. He was born in the state of Maryland. That was a slave state at the time. The day and year of his birth are not known. He celebrated his birthday on Valentine's Day, February 14th. That's coming up here in just a little bit. His mother's name was Harriet Bailey. She was a field slave, so what you would imagine, maybe as you picture the slavery era. He wasn't quite sure who his father was. Generally, he believed that it might have been his white master at the time, named Aaron Anthony. He was separated from his mother when he was a baby, lived with his maternal grandmother, Betty Bailey. His mother did die when he was around 10 years old, so some trauma going on in his childhood, obviously the biggest of which is living as a slave. He did learn to read secretly. He was whipped so that he would break. This is largely what he writes about in one of his autobiographies, is kind of how he came out of slavery. It all starts with his learning to read. Frederick Douglass spent most of his early years serving a man named Hugh Auld in Baltimore, Maryland. Hugh Auld's wife taught him the alphabet when he was 12. She did give up when her husband found out and objected. One of the things that's kind of different about Frederick Douglass's childhood is that as growing up as a slave inside of a big city, he more or less worked inside of houses and had those opportunities to learn how to read. He did continue to secretly learn how to read. He would ask white children to help him read things as well. He was soon reading newspapers, books, really anything he can get his hands on. He did give lessons to other slaves in the plantation until their owners discovered. Hugh's brother sent Frederick to a man named Edward Covey. He was known as a slave breaker. Slave breakers were people who were especially violent towards slaves to try to kind of beat them into submission so they wouldn't rebel. Frederick was whipped regularly. He was about to break psychologically. However, he kind of got to the point where he decided to fight back, and he actually beat Edward Covey in a physical confrontation, in a fight. He was never beaten from that point ever again. One thing that's kind of interesting about how Frederick Douglass came out of slavery is that his freedom was purchased. He did write his autobiography even while enslaved. He and his friends feared that the publicity might make his ex-owner try to reclaim him. So what he did is he ran away to Europe when he got the chance. August 1845, he left for Europe. He stayed in Ireland and England, Britain, for 2 years. While he was there, he was delighted for not being discriminated. One thing that we maybe don't talk about enough in American history is that England ended their institution of slavery earlier than the United States did. It did put some pressure on the U.S. to end slavery as early as they could. Frederick Douglass was kind of surprised in England that no one discriminated against him because of his skin. He did do some teaching in England. He gave several lectures that were well attended. He won a lot of supporters over in the UK. His supporters were the ones who raised funds. They contacted his former master and ended up buying his freedom. In December 1846, after the paperwork was all finalized, he did legally become a free man in the United States, and he returned that year, or the following year. Most importantly, he was prominent in the abolition movement. To abolish something means to end it. He was a wonderful speaker. That's what an orator means. We'll see that in our text today. He was really well known for his speeches. His speech and writing skills made him an important abolitionist, an important figure in that movement. December 1847, that's when he established the newspaper, the North Star. We're going to be looking at one of its first articles in our reading today. This developed into the most influential African-American anti-slavery publication writing of the time. It had a pretty big readership. The abolitionism movement gained prominence during the Civil War. President Lincoln, as we know, signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. And 2 years later, in 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was enacted, which abolished slavery entirely in the U.S. So notice we'll be reading a text in 1847, about 18 years before slavery would be fully banned in the entire United States. Let's take a look at that text. All right, so our paper and its prospects right here. Now, one thing I would note, the formatting looks a little weird on this document, so I've opened it up in Microsoft Word for the sake of reading. It is wise to read questions ahead of time before we look into the text here. So 5 questions I'd like for you to answer this week as you work through this document here. I will break down this text a little bit as we read it here. First thing to look for, true or false, this article was written after slavery was completely abolished in the U.S. If you say true, it means that this was written after slavery was banned. If you say false, it means it was written before. Number 2, which of the following statements best captures the main point of the article's second paragraph? What's nice about this question is it gives you a specific paragraph to look at. Maybe you can answer that as I'm reading paragraph 2. Number 3, another multiple choice. What does Douglass claim will cause the most permanent good in fighting for liberty and equality? Notice that the most permanent good is in quotation marks. Maybe as soon as you see that line used in this text, you might pause the video and see if you can answer your multiple choice question there. And then 2 short answer questions. This one's a little bit shorter. Why do you think Douglass refers to God 3 times in the last 2 paragraphs? You'll see a reference to the Most High. You'll see a reference to divine providence, a reference to God himself. Answer that question in 1 to 3 complete sentences. There's a couple of possible answers for that one, so I'm curious to see what you come up with for number 4. Number 5 is a little bit longer. I want you to answer this with a paragraph. This is a bit of a critical thinking question. In what way did Douglass's newspaper aim an important blow at slavery and prejudice? That's a line from the last paragraph of the text. Another way to think through this is, why is writing an important tool for fighting injustice and inequity today? You can answer one or both of those questions in a 5 to 10 sentence paragraph. So I've given lots and lots and lots of space to type here. You do not need to use all of that space necessarily, but I wanted to give you plenty of space to write a 5 to 10 sentence paragraph there. Take your time as you work through these questions. I think I've set this to be due by Friday, so you got a couple days really to work through this one. I know that you're working on vocab still as well, so take your time as you work through these questions. I'm going to break down the text in our reading here. There we go, and I have pulled it up in Word so it's a little bit easier to read. This is our paper and its prospects. This is an article from the North Star on December 3rd, 1847. Frederick Douglass writes, "We are now about to assume the management of the editorial department of a newspaper devoted to the cause of liberty, humanity, and progress. The position is one which, with the purest motives, we have long desired to occupy. It has long been our anxious wish to see, in this slave-holding, slave-trading, and Negro-hating land, a printing press and paper, permanently established under the complete control and direction of the immediate victims of slavery and oppression." One thing to watch out for in this text, notice any references that Frederick Douglass makes to being a victim of slavery and oppression. It's important to him that this newspaper is run by former slaves. He's going to mention that several times in this text. Paragraph 2. Keep in mind, one of your multiple choice questions comes from this paragraph. "Animated by this intense desire, we have pursued our object, till on the threshold of obtaining it. Our press and printing materials are bought and paid for. Our office is secured and is well situated in the center of business in this enterprising city. Our office agent, an industrious and amiable young man, thoroughly devoted to the interests of humanity, has already entered upon his duties." Notice one of our vocab words, industrious. I think that's the first one on the list right there. Industrious means hardworking or diligent. So one of the things he notes here is that they have an agent to run their office. He's a very hardworking. Amiable means happy or pleasant. He's a hardworking and pleasant young man. "Printers well recommended have offered their services and are ready to work as soon as we are prepared for the regular publication of our paper. Kind friends are rallying around us with words and deeds of encouragement. Subscribers are steadily, if not rapidly, coming in, and some of the best minds in the country are generously offering to lend us the powerful aid of their pens. The sincere wish of our heart, so long and devoutly cherished, seems now upon the eve of complete realization." Seems like things are off to a great start for their newspaper here. Notice I put 3 dots right here. There is a paragraph that I cut out of this, mostly just to give us more room for questions and writing. The paragraph that I cut out is a short one, but it's also a really complex one. So I cut it out just to make sure it was a little more readable and to give us some space for writing. Paragraph 3. "It is neither a reflection on the fidelity, faithfulness, another vocab word, nor a disparagement of the ability of our friends and fellow laborers, to assert what common sense affirms and only folly denies, that the man who has suffered the wrong is the man to demand redress, that the man struck is the man to cry out, and that he who has endured the cruel pangs of slavery is the man to advocate liberty." That's kind of a fancier way of saying what he said earlier, that it's important that this newspaper is run by former slaves. It's run by people who have been damaged by the institution of slavery before and are qualified to discuss it. He says, look, we need to get our voices out there for people to read.
It is evident we must be our own representatives and advocates, not exclusively, but peculiarly, not distinct from, but in connection with our white friends. Now that's interesting right there. Notice that he's not saying that they need to cut out white voices entirely, but they need to work with their white allies in order to defeat slavery. Once again, this is before slavery has ended. In the grand struggle for liberty and equality now waging, it is meet, right, and essential that there should arise in our ranks authors and editors, as well as orators, for it is in these capacities that the most permanent good can be rendered to our cause. There's that phrase, the most permanent good. So that question number 3 is basically asking what this sentence means right here. What does Frederick Douglass say will cause the most permanent good in defeating slavery? It's what he's talking about in this sentence. Hitherto, that's a great word, the immediate victims of slavery and prejudice, owing to various causes, have had little share in this department of effort. They have frequently undertaken, and almost as frequently failed. This latter fact has often been urged by our friends against our engaging in the present enterprise. Another vocabulary word, enterprise. In this case, enterprise means a difficult task. Their big task that they're undertaking here is starting up their anti-slavery newspaper. And he notes in this sentence that he has had friends, he's had allies, kind of urge him against doing it, just thinking that it will maybe bring too much trouble, or that it'll anger too many people, that it will come back against them. But so far from convincing us of the impolicy of our course, it serves to confirm us in the necessity, if not the wisdom, of our undertaking. That others have failed is a reason for our earnestly endeavoring to succeed. Powerful quote, right? We want to succeed because others have failed in the past. Our race must be vindicated from the embarrassing imputations resulting from former non-success. We believe that what ought to be done can be done. Another powerful quote. We say this in no self-confident or boastful spirit, but with a full sense of our weakness and unworthiness, relying upon the Most High, first reference to God, for wisdom and strength to support us in our righteous undertaking. We are not wholly unaware of the duties, hardships, and responsibilities of our position. We have easily imagined some, and friends have not hesitated to inform us of others. Many, doubtless, are yet to be revealed by that infallible teacher, experience. He's basically saying that he knows that they're going to face hardships because they are opening up this newspaper. A few of them solemnize, but do not appall us. We have counted the cost. Our mind is made up, and we are resolved to go forward. Another powerful quote from that paragraph. In aspiring to our present position, the aid of circumstances has been so strikingly apparent as to almost stamp our humble aspirations with the solemn sanctions of a divine providence. That is a $10 sentence right there. So let me break this one down for us a little bit. In aspiring to our present position, in getting to this point of opening a newspaper, the aid of circumstances has been strikingly apparent. We've had such good luck and good fortune, great circumstances, as to almost stamp our humble aspirations with divine providence, as almost to suggest that God himself has blessed this endeavor. 9 years ago, as most of our readers are aware, we were held as a slave, shrouded in the midnight ignorance of that infernal system. Infernal means hellish or devilish, right? It's an evil system. Sunken in the depths of senility and degradation, registered with four-footed beasts and creeping things, regarded as property, compelled to toil without wages, with a heart swollen with bitter anguish, and a spirit crushed and broken. That is Frederick Douglass's summary of what slavery feels like. By a singular combination of circumstances, we finally succeeded in escaping from the grasp of the man who claimed us as his property, and succeeded in safely reaching New Bedford, Massachusetts. In this town, we worked 3 years as a daily laborer on the wharves. 6 years ago, we became a lecturer on slavery. Under the apprehension of being retaken into bondage, 2 years ago we embarked for England. During our stay in that country, kind friends, anxious for our safety, ransomed us from slavery by the payment of a large sum. Notice right here, a lot of this is information that we got in that PowerPoint. We're kind of told here about how Frederick Douglass broke from slavery. For one, he safely reached a free state, Massachusetts, and worked. He was actually a paid laborer on wharves. Those are docks. So worked near the sea. Started teaching about slavery, went to England. We learned all those things from that PowerPoint. The same friends, as unexpectedly and as generously, placed in our hands the necessary means of purchasing a printing press and printing materials, so other people have equipped Frederick Douglass to start his newspaper. Finding ourselves now in a favorable position for aiming an important blow at slavery and injustice, we feel urged on in our enterprise by a sense of duty to God and man, firmly believing that our effort will be crowned with entire success. One thing I forgot to mention is the title of this article. So notice that's Our Paper and Its Prospects. So if you kind of imagine this showing up in issue number 1 of the North Star, it's basically an article explaining what this newspaper is for. As you work through these questions, you'll get a better idea of what this newspaper is for and why it's so important. Once again, first one's a true-false. Take a look at the date that this article was written. It'll give you an idea there. Second paragraph, you can count back and find that. The second paragraph is either about how slavery is an evil that needs to end, that the newspaper business is off to a great start, that black people and white people must work together to end slavery, or that America must prepare for a civil war. This might be a good one to eliminate for. Cross off the ones that are clearly not the correct answer for paragraph 2. See which one is left from there. To answer this one, I would just select the one that you like and highlight it or underline it. Number 3 is another multiple choice. Once again, what does Douglass claim will cause the most permanent good in fighting for liberty and equality? I think that was at the end of that third paragraph. The last 2 paragraphs, why do you think Douglass refers to God 3 times? On this one, you can kind of give your opinion there. There's a couple of ideas that are really clear from the text here about why Douglass refers to God. And the last one, in what way did Douglass's newspaper aim an important blow at slavery and prejudice? In other words, in what way did this newspaper really fight against slavery before slavery was abolished 18 years later? Why is writing an important tool for fighting injustice and inequity today? If you're looking for another route to take this question. Again, you can answer one or both of these in a 5 to 10 sentence paragraph here. Take your time as you work through this document. Let me know in Microsoft Teams if you have any questions for me.